It started with a punch, not a wild bar fight punch, not some heated argument that got out of hand. No, this one was cold, deliberate, meant to put somebody in their place. A uniformed cop, broad shoulders and a sneer carved into his face, swung his fist right into a woman's cheek. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the narrow concrete room. Her head snapped, her lip split, and for a second, the only thing in the air was the taste of blood and the echo of power misused. He thought she was just another nobody on the street. What he didn't know, what made that moment unforgettable, was that the woman he hit wasn't some nameless vagrant. She was the brand new police chief of the entire city in disguise, and she had just caught him on tape, sealing his own fate. The woman's name was Renee Lawson, though out there on the street everyone knew her as Lila. She'd been sworn in as the first black female chief only a week earlier. Reporters called it historic. Politicians called it progress. But Renee, she knew words were cheap. Standing behind a podium promising reform didn't change anything. What mattered was what happened when no one was looking down in the cracks where the system rotted. And in her city, the rot had a name, Lieutenant Carl Heston. His file was thicker than a phone book, excessive force racial profiling, evidence lost, witnesses recanting after late-night visits. Nothing ever stuck. Everyone in uniform knew he was poison, but poison spreads when no one dares to clean it out. Renee wasn't going to write a memo. She was going to cut it out herself. That's how she ended up shivering in an alley off Burnside Avenue shoes, with holes stuffed with cardboard coat that stank of mildew wool hat pulled down low. She had practiced the look of being invisible, the way people's eyes slid right over you when you were slouched on a stoop with a tin can at your feet. For 3 days, she lived as Lila, the kind of woman cops like Heston liked to push around. The plan was simple: get picked up for something petty, get dragged into his precinct, and let him show the world who he really was. Her backup was just 2 blocks away. Detective Chris Morales, a loyal officer she'd mentored years ago, sat in an unmarked sedan, listening to every word through the tiny mic sewn into her collar. "You sure about this?" he'd asked earlier. Renee had only nodded. "If I don't feel what they feel, I'll never know the truth." That night the bait was taken. A cruiser rolled up to the curb, headlights slicing through the mist. Out stepped Heston himself, thick-necked, jaw set like he owned the block. His younger partner stayed by the car, uneasy. Heston's voice came low, mocking. Well, what do we have here? Burnside's getting crowded with trash." He kicked her tin can coins, rattling across the pavement. Renee kept her eyes down, mumbling, playing the part. Then she reached for a bruised apple from a grocer's trash crate. That was the trigger. "Stealing, huh?" Heston's grin stretched mean. "That's all I need. You're coming with me." His hand clamped down on her arm like a vice, dragging her toward the cruiser. She whimpered, "Please, I wasn't." He cut her off. "Save it. You're about to learn what happens to thieves in my precinct." The ride back was silent except for the squeak of the vinyl seat under her. Renee breathed slow. The trap was closing. Inside the precinct, he bypassed the front desk and hauled her down a dim hallway to a room that reeked of stale coffee and bleach. The walls sweated neglect. 2 of his cronies filed in behind them. Officers Dunn and Keller, both names Renee had seen in misconduct. Complaints that went nowhere. They leaned on the wall, smirking, blocking the exit. Heston sat across from her, leaning in so close she could smell the cigarettes on his breath. "Name, Lila," she whispered. "Lila what?" "Just Lila." He chuckled. "No last name, no home, no purpose. Just sucking up air." His palm slammed the table, making her flinch. "Look at me when I'm talking, you worthless thief." Every word was a scalpel meant to carve away her humanity. And through it all, Renee stayed in character, trembling, a tear rolling down her cheek. Inside, though, the chief of police was cataloging every slur, every violation, knowing the mic on her collar was her silent witness. It built slowly accusations about car break-ins. She knew teenagers in the suburbs had committed threats to make this hard, unless she confessed to crimes that didn't exist. And then it boiled over. He reared back and punched her across the face. Not a burst of temper, a cold decision. His fist slammed bone and white light exploded in her skull. She sagged in the chair, lip bleeding, ears ringing. But inside, she was smiling. The sound of that punch, his words before and after, were now immortal. She had him. Damn, Carl, you hit her good. Dunn laughed. She asked for it, Heston muttered. Shaking out his hand, he grabbed her coat, yanking her upright. Now tell me the truth before I remind you again. He raised his fist for another swing, and then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the metal door. Sergeant Morales poked his head in, eyes steady. Lieutenant Captain's on line 1. Says it's urgent downtown robbery case. Those last 3 words were the code. Execute. Heston cursed, storming out with Keller at his heels, leaving Dunn to guard. That's when Renee moved. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached inside her filthy coat. Dunn tensed hand on his gun. Hey, what the hell are you pulling out? She laid a black leather wallet on the table, flipped it open. The light caught polished gold. Chief of Police. Dunn's smirk vanished. His face went pale as chalk. He couldn't reconcile the bloodied woman slumped in the chair with the authority blazing from that badge. Right then, Morales and Officer Vega slipped in behind him, cuffs ready. Officer Dunn Renee's voice was no longer the rasp of Lila. It was steel commanding. You're under arrest for accessory to assault in conspiracy. Hands behind your back. He froze, too stunned to resist as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. And that's when Heston walked back in. He saw Dunn restrained, saw the badge on the table, and finally he saw her. The color drained from his face as the realization crashed down. Chief, I didn't know. His words came out weak, pathetic. That she said, her voice icy, is the problem. You never know. You never care. To you, I was trash. The room went silent as Morales and Vega cuffed him, reading him the same rights he'd spat at countless suspects. The mighty lieutenant dragged out like a criminal. Other officers clustered in the hall, eyes wide, whispers buzzing like electricity. Minutes later, Renee stood before the entire night shift in the briefing room, her face, bruised lip, bleeding uniform, nowhere in sight. She hadn't cleaned up. She wanted them to see. For those who don't know me, she began, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. I am Chief Renee Lawson. Tonight I was a homeless woman named Lila, arrested for stealing a piece of fruit. Gasps rippled through the room. I did this because I've read the files you all pretend don't exist. I've heard the community begging for someone to listen. They said there's a cancer in this department, one that thrives in the dark. So I stepped into the dark and I watched. Tonight I felt it with my own skin. She paused, letting the weight settle. Heston and Dunn are fired and will be prosecuted. Keller, who stood by, is suspended pending termination. And let me be clear, this is just the beginning. An independent task force will rip through every file, every complaint, every officer. If you serve with integrity, I'll back you every day. But if you wear this badge as a license to bully, to hate, to prey, you're done. I will find you and I will cut you out. Silence, heavy, suffocating. And then a flicker, hope mingled with fear. For the first time in years, the room felt like it belonged to justice. Later, as dawn painted the skyline in pale orange, Renee stood in her office, looking out over the city. The bruise on her cheek throbbed, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the first shot in a long, brutal war. She thought of the real people, those who never had a badge to flash, who suffered in silence. She touched her cheek, whispering to herself, this is for them. And here's the thing, was she right to go undercover, to let herself get hit, just to expose the truth? Or was it reckless, setting a precedent that could have gone very, very wrong? Maybe reform needs strong leadership. Maybe it needs community oversight. Maybe it needs something else entirely. What do you think? If you were in Renee's shoes, would you have taken that punch to catch a corrupt cop? Drop your thoughts below. I want to know where you stand on justice, on power, and on what it really takes to clean out a broken system.